Hello everybody, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we shall be analyzing the Hindu newspaper dated 20th of November 2018 of the New Delhi edition. The topics to be discussed today has been presented on the screen. Timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. Now both these articles appear on page number 1 and page number 13. Now these articles have appeared in the newspaper in the context of the unprecedented meeting of the Central Board of Directors of the RBI, which took place in the backdrop of the growing differences between the RBI and the government on number of issues. Hence, this particular articles becomes important from the perspective of GS paper 3 under the subsection Indian economy and various issues. As you all know, a lot of differences have cropped up between the RBI and the government on number of issues. It was behind this particular backdrop, the Central Board of RBI was expected to address some of these concerns. And the concerns which were discussed during this meeting included aligning capital norms of the Indian banks to the international Basel III norms, the relaxation of prompt corrective action framework, the issues related to transfer of RBI's reserves, the easing of credit for micro, small and medium enterprises, and special liquidity window for the NBFCs. Hence, as part of this video analysis, we will understand the viewpoints of the RBI and the government on each of these issues, that is, as to why these issues became a bone of contention between the RBI and the government, and then we'll analyze as to what was the decision of the Central Board on each of these issues. Let us now start with the first issue of aligning the capital norms of the banks to the Basel III norms. So coming to the first issue of differences over the Basel III norms, the main issue here was that the Reserve Bank of India had stipulated certain norms to be followed by the Indian banks under the Basel III norms. However, these norms stipulated by the RBI were much more stringent than the international Basel III norms. So it is in this particular aspect, the Government of India wanted the Reserve Bank of India to follow the international Basel III norms and give up the stringent norms laid down by the RBI. So in order to understand this particular issue, firstly you have to understand about the Basel III norms. Secondly, you will have to understand about what stringent norms were laid down by the RBI. And thirdly, as to why the government wanted the RBI to give up these stringent norms. Let us understand these aspects one by one. There is an international financial institution known as Bank of International Settlements, which is located in Basel in Switzerland. This particular international institution promotes financial and monetary cooperation among the countries and also serves as the central bank of all the central banks. Now, one of the most important committees under this Bank of International Settlement is the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision. Now, this particular committee lays down the Basel norms to be followed by the banks across the world. Now, these Basel norms are mainly laid down in order to ensure the financial stability of the banks and to prevent their failure. So, this is one of the most important aspects of the Basel norms, since the failure of banks can have widespread ramifications on the economy as seen during the 2008 financial crisis. It is in this particular aspect the Basel norms ensure that the banks are resilient and able to withstand the losses. So far, the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision has laid down three Basel norms. The Basel I norm were laid down in the year 1988, the Basel II in 2004, and the Basel III norms, which are the latest norms, were laid down in the year 2009. And the Basel III norms were required to be adopted by the Indian banks by the end of March 2019. In order to ensure the financial stability of the banks and to prevent their failure, the Basel norms laid down the capital adequacy ratio. The capital adequacy ratio is based on a principle that the bank should have sufficient amount of its own capital in order to cover the risk arising from the bad assets or the bad loans. Which means that under the capital adequacy ratio, the banks have to set aside certain amount of its own capital in order to cover the risk arising from the bad loans. And this ensures that the banks are financially stable and it will also prevent its failure. And the formula for the calculation of capital adequacy ratio is given as Tier 1 capital plus Tier 2 capital divided by the risk weighted assets into 100, and it is always expressed in terms of percentage. Let us understand this formula by a simple example. Let's say a particular bank has given totally 1000 rupees in the form of loans. Now the Basel norms has laid down detailed guidelines as to how to assign risk to different categories of loans and how to calculate the risk-weighted assets of a bank. And let's say, accordingly, the risk associated with the loans given by a bank comes to around rupees 200. Now what this means is, if a bank has given 1000 rupees in the form of a loan, under all probabilities, the bank would get back 800 rupees. However, the remaining 200 rupees is associated with the risk, and hence the bank has lesser probability to get back this 200 rupees. So accordingly, under the capital adequacy ratio, the bank should have sufficient amount of its own capital in order to withstand the future loss which may take place due to default of this rupees 200 by the borrowers. And in order to cover this risk, let's say the capital adequacy ratio is mentioned at 8%. So if you substitute these values into formula, it would be Tier 1 capital plus Tier 2 capital divided by rupees 200, that is the risk weighted assets, into 100 should be equal to 8%, that is the capital adequacy ratio. So accordingly, the Tier 1 capital plus Tier 2 capital should be equal to rupees 16. This means that in order to cover a risk of rupees 200 arising from the bad loans, the bank should have to maintain rupees 16 in form of its own capital, and this rupees 16 has to be in form of the Tier 1 capital, that is equity, as well as the Tier 2 capital, that is in the form of a debt. The equity here refers to the amount of funds invested by the promoters of the bank, and the debt here represents the borrowings of the bank. So both Tier 1 plus Tier 2 capital should be equal to rupees 16 in order to ensure the capital adequacy ratio of 8% for this particular bank. So having understood about the Basel norms, let us now understand as to how the RBI's norms are much more stringent than the Basel norms. Under the Basel III norms, the capital adequacy ratio has to be maintained at 8%, and as discussed, the capital adequacy ratio consists of the Tier 1 capital and the Tier 2 capital, wherein the Tier 1 capital has to be maintained at 6% and the minimum Tier 2 capital has to be maintained at 2%. Further, the minimum Tier 1 capital consists of the common equity tier capital of 4.5% and the additional Tier 1 capital 1.5%. Now, apart from the capital adequacy ratio of 8%, the Basel III norms also stipulate for maintenance of capital conservation buffer. And as the name suggests, this particular buffer has to be maintained by the banks in order to withstand any financial crisis. And this capital conservation buffer has to be maintained at 2.5% of the risk-weighted assets. So under the Basel III norms, the total capital which has to be maintained by the banks is 10.5% of the total risk-weighted assets. However, under the norms stipulated by the RBI, the banks in India are required to maintain total 11.5% of the risk-weighted assets, which is 1% higher than the Basel III norms. And this difference of 1% is mainly on account of the minimum Tier 1 capital of 7%, wherein the Reserve Bank of India has stipulated that the common equity tier capital has to be maintained at 5.5% as against the 4.5% stipulated under the Basel III norms. Now this particular table here is a screenshot which has been taken from the RBI's document on the roadmap for the implementation of Basel III norms in India. And as you can see here, the Basel III norms are required to be adopted in India by the end of March 31st, 2019. Now coming to the government's demand with respect to the RBI's norms, the government of India was asking the Reserve Bank of India to reduce the minimum Tier 1 capital to 6% as provided under the Basel III norms. This is because, as discussed, the Tier 1 capital is in a form of a equity, and hence it needed the government to inject the capital into the economy. Hence, in order to avoid the injection of capital into the public sector banks, the government was demanding that the Tier 1 capital should be reduced to 6% instead of the 7%. However, the Central Board of the RBI has decided that the Tier 1 capital will continue to be maintained at 7% only. However, it has given additional time frame for the implementation of Basel III norms in India. Earlier, the Basel III norms were required to be implemented by the end of March 31st, 2019. However, according to the new timeline, the Basel III norms would now have to be implemented by the end of March 2020. So the RBI has given an extension of 1 year with respect to the implementation of the Basel III norms in India. Now these are some of the aspects which one should know with respect to differences of opinion between the RBI and the government with respect to implementation of Basel norms in India. The second issue between the RBI and the government was with respect to the relaxation of the prompt corrective action framework adopted by the Reserve Bank of India. Now, it is to be noted that the Reserve Bank of India has placed 11 public sector banks under the prompt corrective action. This is because these public sector banks have accumulated a total losses of 70,000 crores due to the bad loans. And under this prompt corrective action, the RBI has placed certain restrictions on these public sector banks. And these restrictions include payment of dividend to the government, branch expansion by the banks. Further, these banks are also required to adopt higher provisioning norms, which means that under these provisioning norms, the banks would be required to set aside a higher amount of capital in order to withstand the losses due to the NPAs. It was behind this particular backdrop the government was asking RBI to relax the prompt corrective action framework. This is because the government believes that the placement of these 11 public sector banks under the prompt corrective action framework is hurting the credit growth of micro, small and medium enterprises. It is in this particular aspect the government was arguing for the relaxation of the prompt corrective action framework. So, in response to the government's demand, the Central Board of the RBI has decided that the relaxation in the PCF framework shall be examined by the Board for Financial Inclusion under the Reserve Bank of India. So, this particular issue of relaxation of PCF framework remains unaddressed, and this will be taken up separately by the Board for Financial Inclusion of the RBI. The third issue between the RBI and the government was with respect to the liquidity crunch faced by the NBFCs in India. As you know, there has been series of default on the loans by the NBFCs such as IL and FS, and the NBFCs are facing liquidity crunch, that is shortage of money in the Indian economy. And in the next 3 months, the NBFCs are required to pay back almost 1.2 lakh crore which they had earlier taken in the form of loans. And it is being said that the further default by the NBFCs in India would have an adverse impact on the Indian economy, leading to contagion effect. That is, the crisis in the NBFCs would in turn spread to the other sectors as well. So it was behind this particular backdrop, the government was arguing that the RBI should open a separate window in order to provide the liquidity to the NBFCs. However, the Central Board of the RBI has rejected the idea of separate window for the NBFCs. On the other hand, the RBI has stated that it would inject liquidity worth 8,000 crores into the economy through carrying out the open market operations. The fourth issue between the RBI and the government was with respect to the easing of credit norms for the MSMEs. With respect to this particular issue, the RBI board has now allowed the banks to restructure the loans given to the MSMEs up to 25 crores. So this particular provision of restructuring of loans given to the MSMEs would give them certain flexibility with respect to the repayment of their previous loans. The fifth issue was with respect to transfer of the surplus reserves from the RBI to the government, wherein the government was demanding RBI that it should transfer at least 1/3 of its reserves to the government. So with respect to this particular issue, you would be required to know as to what exactly constitute the RBI's reserves, how much reserves does the RBI has now, why is the government demanding for the transfer of surplus reserves, and the recommendations of various committees with respect to how much amount of reserves should the RBI maintain. Now all these details have been comprehensively been covered in our Daily News Simplified video of 5th of November 2018. So please go through this particular video in order to understand all these aspects related to the transfer of surplus reserves from the RBI to the government. And with respect to this transfer of the surplus reserves, the RBI board has decided that a committee would be set up jointly by the RBI and the government, and this particular committee shall include the representatives from the government as well as the RBI, and this particular committee shall look into details related to the adequacy of the RBI reserves as well as the transfer of RBI reserves to the government. So these are some of the aspects which one should know with respect to the meeting of the Central Board of the RBI. Now based on the discussion which we had so far, this would be a prelims question for the practice. You can pause this particular video and the answer to this particular question shall be discussed after 5 seconds. The question here is, consider the following statements related to the capital adequacy ratio. The first statement is, it has been laid down under the Basel norms. As discussed, this particular statement is correct. Now the second statement reads as, it is based on the principle that banks have to keep aside certain percentage of the depositors' money in order to withstand losses arising from the NPAs. Now what is important to be noted here is, under the capital adequacy ratio, the banks are required to set aside a certain percentage of their own funds and not that of the depositors' money. Hence, this particular statement is wrong. The third statement reads as it is calculated in terms of the risk-weighted assets of the bank. Now, as discussed, this particular statement is right. So, in the list of statements given here, statement number 1 and 3 are correct. So, accordingly, the answer for this particular question is D, that is 1 and 3 only. With this, let us now move to the next article. The next article appears on page number 6. The title of the article is Supreme Court to direct the states on the draft witness protection scheme. This particular article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 2 Governance under the subsection Government Policies and Interventions. As the title of this particular article suggests, the Supreme Court would be directing the states on the implementation of the draft witness protection scheme. Hence, as part of this particular video analysis, we shall understand as to what is witness protection, the scope of witness protection, why do we need witness protection in India, the role of state in the witness protection, and finally, the aims and objectives of the Draft Witness Protection Scheme 2018. Now coming to the first aspect as to what exactly is witness protection. Now witness protection refers to protection of those people who have witnessed a crime and are ready to record their particular statement in a court of law. And the scope of witness protection include providing police escort to the witness when he is supposed to record the statement in a court of law, offering temporary residence in a safe house to a witness, using video conferencing by a court to record the statement of a witness, keeping the name of the witness anonymous. Further, the witness protection can also include giving a new identity to a witness and relocating him to a new place. Now, these are some of the ways under which the witness protection can be given to the people. Let us now understand as to why do we need the witness protection in India. Now, in the recent times, there has been rapid growth of organized crime in India. In spite of the fact that people would have observed commission of crimes such as murders, thefts, rapes, etc., most of the time people do not come forward to become witness in a court of law. This is because they fear harassment and intimidation from the criminal elements. It is in this particular aspect the witness protection becomes extremely important in India. So having a witness protection ensures that the witness have faith in the criminal justice system, and through such witness protection the witness are assured that they will receive the necessary support from the government, and they are also protected from the intimidation and harassment by the criminal elements. So because of this assurance given under the witness protection, the witness would extend help in investigation and prosecution of the crimes. So giving of witness protection in India is one of the main criminal justice reforms which has to be implemented by the government, since it helps in better investigation and prosecution of organized crimes in India. Coming now to the role of the state in the witness protection, it was the famous political philosopher Jeremy Bentham who highlighted the role of the witness in the criminal justice system of a country, wherein he stated that the witnesses are the eyes and ears of the justice. However, we have seen many instances wherein the witnesses have turned hostile because of the threat to life and property, particularly in the cases involving the influential people. So since a state is considered to be a protector of its citizens, it becomes its duty in order to give adequate protection to a witness. Now coming to the draft witness protection scheme, this particular scheme aims to provide a conducive environment for the protection of witness so as to improve the criminal justice system in India. So in order to provide a conducive environment for the witnesses, this particular scheme confers multiple rights on them, and these rights include the right to give evidence anonymously, the right to protection from intimidation, the right to information on the status of the investigation and prosecution of crimes, the right to transportation as well as the lodging arrangements, and lastly, right to secure waiting place during the court proceedings. Now these are some of the rights which are conferred on the witness under the Witness Protection Scheme of 2018. So these are some of the aspects which one should know with respect to this particular article. Based on the discussion which we had so far, this would be a prelims question for the practice. Please pause this particular video and try to solve this particular question. We will discuss the answer to this particular question after 5 seconds. Now the question reads, which among the following rights are conferred on the witnesses under the Draft Witness Protection Scheme 2018? The first one is right to protection from intimidation. The second one is right to give evidence anonymously. And the third one is right to transportation and lodging arrangements. And as we have discussed, all these three rights have been conferred on the witnesses under the Draft Witness Protection Scheme 2018. Hence, the correct answer to this particular question is D, that is 1, 2, and 3. With this, let us now move to the next article. Now, the next article appears on page number 10. The title of the article is Army Selects the Russian IGLA-S Missile. The reason why we have picked up this particular article is that normally in UPSC prelims, questions have been asked with respect to defense technology. Hence, this particular article mainly becomes important from the perspective of prelims. As the title of this particular article suggests, that the Indian Army has selected the Russian IGLA-S missile. So as part of this video analysis, let us understand some brief details related to the IGLA-S missile. The IGLA-S missile is a man-portable air defense system, also known as MANPADS. Now, this particular air defense system uses surface-to-air missile in order to target the enemy aircrafts, helicopters and unmanned aerial vehicles. Further, it has a maximum horizontal range of 6 km and the vertical range of this missile is 3.5 km. And the technology used by this missile system is known as the infrared homing technology. That is, it uses the infrared waves emitted by the enemy aircrafts in order to target them. As you know, the aircrafts and helicopters emit heat from their engines, and this particular heat is visible in the infrared wavelength of the visible light. Now, the infrared waves emitted by the aircrafts are in turn detected by using the infrared homing technology used in the missiles. And using this particular technology, the missiles can track and target the enemy aircrafts and helicopters. Further, the infrared homing technology is also referred to as a passive technology, since the targets such as aircrafts and helicopters have no indication that they are being tracked by a missile. Further, similar to the IGLA missile developed by Russia, the USA also has its own man-portable air defense system known as Stinger. Even this particular air defense system works on the principle of the infrared homing technology. Now, these are some of the aspects which one should know with respect to this particular article. So, based on the discussion which we had so far, this would be a prelims question for the practice. Please pause this video and try to find answer to this particular question. We will discuss the answer to this particular question after 5 seconds. The question here is, consider the following statements related to the infrared homing technology used in the missiles. The first statement is, it uses the infrared waves emitted by the target in order to track and attack the target. Now, as we have discussed, this particular statement is right. The second statement reads as, it is considered to be an active technology as a target is aware that it is being tracked. Now, this particular statement is wrong. This is because, as we have discussed, the infrared homing technology is considered to be passive technology since the target is not aware that it is being tracked. So, looking at the statements here, only statement number 1 is correct. So, the correct answer to this particular question is A, that is 1 only. With this, let us now move to the next article. Now, the next article appears as an editorial on page number 8. The title of the article is Quota Math. This particular article shall be important from the perspective of GS paper 2 governance. Before analyzing this particular article, let us first look into the background. Now, recently, the Maharashtra cabinet has decided to grant reservation to Marathas. And this reservation to Marathas was granted based upon the recommendations of the State Backward Class Commission, which recommended for the reservation for Marathas under the separate category known as socially and educationally backward class. And the rationale for providing reservations by the State Backward Class Commission was based on the fact that there is minuscule representation of Marathas in the government services. However, the author of this particular article has raised certain concerns with respect to the reservation being granted to the Marathas. It is in this particular aspect, let us understand the viewpoints expressed by the author with respect to the reservation for the Marathas. The first concern raised by the author is that the author is of the opinion that the Marathas enjoy higher socio-economic status in Maharashtra, because of which he has stated that the findings of the State Backward Class Commission do not match with the available data related to the employment of Marathas. So the article highlights that the Marathas enjoy higher socio-economic status and hence ideally they are not socially and educationally backward class. Secondly, the article highlights that the demand for reservation by Marathas is only to avail the reservation benefits from the government. Thirdly, the article highlights that the decision of the Maharashtra government to provide reservation to Marathas was on account of vote bank politics and not because of any socio-economic reasons. Further, the article highlights that creation of separate category in order to provide reservation for the Marathas would increase the overall reservation in Maharashtra beyond 50% limit set by the Supreme Court. Hence, this particular decision of the Maharashtra cabinet would not be able to withstand the judicial scrutiny and it is likely to be rejected by the Supreme Court. Finally, the article concludes by saying that there has been growing demand for reservation, particularly by dominant communities in India, such as the Jats in Rajasthan and Patels in Gujarat. And this is mainly on account of the lack of employment opportunities in India, as well as due to desire of these communities to climb up the economic ladder. Hence, the article concludes by saying that instead of providing reservation to these dominant communities, the government should rather focus on creation of jobs and improving the agrarian economy. Now, these are some of the aspects which one should know with respect to this particular article. With this, let us now move to the next article. The next article appears on page number 7. The title of the article is Literacy Levels in Rural India Suffer from Migration of Families. This particular article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 2 Governance under the subsection Issues related to Development and Management of Social Sectors related to Education. Before analyzing this particular article, let us first look into the background. Now, this particular article has appeared in the newspaper in the context of the publication of the Global Education Monitoring Report by the international agency known as UNESCO. And the theme of this year's report was the migration and displacement, wherein under this particular report, the UNESCO has tried to understand the impact of migration on educational levels of the children. And accordingly, it has highlighted that the education system across the world should try to accommodate the interests of the migrants. So as part of this video analysis, we will first understand the Indian scenario, that is how the migration in India is impacting the education levels of the children. And secondly, we look into certain recommendations given by the UNICEF in order to address various issues faced by the migrant children. Now, coming to the impact of migration and displacement on education in India. Now, this particular report highlights that the interstate migration in India has almost doubled between 2001 to 2011, due to which there has been drastic increase in the migrant children population. And in order to address the educational needs of these migrant children, the Right to Education Act has made it mandatory for the local authorities in India to compulsorily admit the migrant children. Further, some of the states in India have taken certain initiatives in order to address the educational needs of the migrant children. For example, the state government of Tamil Nadu has made a provision for providing the textbooks in the other languages to the migrant children. The state government of Gujarat has set up the seasonal boarding schools for the migrant children. Further, the state government of Maharashtra has appointed volunteers in order to look after the needs of the migrant children. However, this particular report has raised certain concerns with respect to impact of migration on the migrant children, wherein it has stated that almost 80% of the migrant children do not have access to education. Further, the report states that there is negative impact on the education of those children who are left behind in the rural areas as their parents migrate to the urban areas, wherein it highlights that the performance of such children in the rural areas is comparatively poor. Now, this particular report has given certain recommendations in order to address the concerns faced by the migrant children. Let us look at these recommendations one by one. The first recommendation is that the school environment in India needs to adapt in order to support the specific needs of the migrant children. For example, one can look at the initiative taken by the state government of Tamil Nadu, wherein the Tamil Nadu government has been providing for the textbooks in the other languages to the migrant children. So the school environment has to specifically adapt in order to support the needs of the migrant children. Secondly, the report has suggested that the teachers in India should be well trained in order to cater to the demands of the migrant children. The next recommendation is that there has to be special schools and seasonal hostels for the migrant children. Finally, the report has also suggested that changes may also be made in the educational curriculum in order to take into the concerns faced by the migrant children. Now, these are some of the aspects which one should know with respect to this particular article. So, based on the discussion which we had so far, this would be a prelims question for the practice. Please pause this particular video and try to find answer to this particular question. We will be discussing the answer to this particular question after 5 seconds. The question here is, consider the following statements. The first statement is, the Global Education Monitoring Report is published by UNDP. Now this particular statement is wrong because as we have discussed, this report is published by UNESCO and not UNDP. The second statement reads as, the theme of this year's report is on impact of migration and displacement on the educational levels. Now this particular statement is right. So looking at the options here, the correct answer to this particular question is B, that is 2 only. With this, we have come to end of today's discussion. Now let us look at the question for the day.